In yesterday's video, we looked at a lot of NHL trade rumors from the Eastern Conference. Well, today we're taking a look at some trade rumors from the Western Conference and some things we might see happen between trades and free agency once the official offseason kicks underway. And we also have a few more signings to discuss as well. We'll jump into all the latest coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have some more NHL rumors I want to take a look at for the Western Conference and a few signings, which we'll start with here first of all to get this out of the way. The St. Louis Blues have extended pending RFA forward Sammy Blais to a 2-year deal worth $1.5 million per year. Of course, Sammy Blais has been a fairly regular guy in the Blues lineup over the past 2 years. Last year, he was starting to become more of a regular player in the second half, but was a big part of their playoff run. Played a lot during the playoffs and most of their playoff games. And then this year, he was playing quite a bit as well, so he's kind of become a pretty solid member of their regular team. And now he's going to be extended. He would have been an RFA once the offseason finally kicks in, but of course, that will now be avoided for the Blues. So it's important for them, like many other teams that are going to be tight up against the cap, to have a lot of these contracts done. Have some cheaper contracts like a guy like Blais who can still play a solid role for them but not be too expensive. Now, the Pittsburgh Penguins have also made a signing as well. They signed Will Riley, who was one of their draft picks from the 2017 draft back in the 7th round. So he was a late round pick. He's a right shot defenseman, 22 years old. So he gets a 2-year entry-level contract due to his age. He's played the past 4 seasons of NCAA hockey at RPI. Had a pretty decent run there. He put up 22 points in 34 games for the past season and looks like he's ready to make the jump here to pro hockey. So we'll see how he makes out. Luckily starts with their American Hockey League affiliate and goes from there. But Will Riley is 7th round pick. You don't often see too many of them making it to the pros. So we'll see if he can actually get himself a spot in the NHL. Now, as I mentioned, I want to take a look at some rumors, some of it involving trades and free agency from some Western Conference teams. And I want to get started here with the Arizona Coyotes. Now, we kind of touched on them a bit yesterday, talking about Taylor Hall's pending free agency, where he might end up, and the strong possibility of him maybe ending up back in the Eastern Conference, because there's been some talk about a team like the Columbus Blue Jackets being interested. Well, this article from Sportsnet that we're talking about over the last few videos covers another team that would likely be a good spot for Hall and likely would show a lot of interest. Probably more so, though, on a shorter-term contract, I would think would be the Colorado Avalanche. Now, Taylor Hall, very well could stay in Arizona. It's a possibility. But considering how things went and the fact that they were out of the playoffs, it's certainly a pretty good possibility, in my opinion, that he does depart. And I think the Avalanche will be an excellent fit there. Now, the only concern with the Avalanche signing Hall is that if they ink him to a big-time contract for a long term, it's going to prove a lot of other challenges. Right now, they're in a pretty good spot when it comes to the cap, but they're going to need guys like Cale Makar, who's proven to be a superstar defenseman, is going to need a big deal coming out of his entry-level contract. And even their captain, Gabriel Landeskog, only has 1 more year left, so he's been a really solid big part of their top 6, so he's going to need a sizable raise as well, so that's going to prove difficult for those 2 contracts if they gave Hall a lot of money. I said last year at the NHL trade deadline, I thought Taylor Hall would be a tremendous fit with the Avalanche. Can you imagine adding another player like that to their top 6? I do think that the Avalanche will have interest, but given how everything's likely going to go with the salary cap, I think the only real possible way that this happens is if Taylor Hall is willing to accept a shorter-term contract, maybe 1 or 2 year deal, so they're not bound up too long and too much money when they need to do those other contracts that we just referenced here. I mean, clearly Taylor Hall's coming off a bit of a down season. Maybe he would agree to a shorter-term contract, given the fact that the cap won't rise like everybody thought it would, at least not right away. And it would give him an opportunity to kind of rebuild himself here in another solid year with a team like Colorado. You would think his stats would go through the roof, and then he'd be able to command a lot more money on free agent market once he were to reach that again here in another year or 2 time. I mean, probably an unlikely scenario, but it does make a lot of sense that the Avalanche would come calling if indeed he does test free agency, which many suspect he will. But sticking with the Coyotes here momentarily, assuming Taylor Hall either stays or leaves, it still creates a bit of an issue for the Coyotes, who are starving for goals. They brought in some big-time players like Hall and Phil Kessel over the last year or so, and they have not been able to produce more offense that this team so desperately needs. They've gotten excellent goaltending, some pretty solid defense, but they can't put the puck in the net, and that's definitely their downfall to not being a stronger team and being a more solid playoff team. Clearly, Phil Kessel's disappointed in his time in Arizona so far, and adding Taylor Hall at the deadline didn't really give them the boost they thought they were going to be getting either. So like I said, that's my opinion why I think Taylor Hall could leave. But even if he stays, there's no guarantee that the current mix of forwards are really going to be able to produce much more offense, and where the goal is going to come from is the big question here. So John Chayka is definitely going to have to get creative this offseason and try to take this team another step forward. Obviously, they've already moved their 2020 first-round pick that they used to acquire Taylor Hall. The only way they can keep that is if the lottery goes their way and they end up with a top 3 selection, because it is top 3 protected. Otherwise, that pick goes to New Jersey, so they'd be without that. There's still talk, like we've discussed here a few days ago, about the impending investigation results of them, testing junior age players illegally. There could be some penalties coming in the form of losing some draft picks. So obviously that takes away a big currency for trades or getting some good prospects in your system. Either way, it hurts a lot. So that could be happening with the Coyotes here once we find out more of that, likely as we get closer to summertime would be my guess. I'm not sure when we'll really know the outcome of that investigation. Have to move another piece off his roster that would bring him some decent returns. We might be looking at a guy like Jacob Chychrun on the back end, who's still fairly young and signed to a pretty reasonable contract longer term, or maybe even a guy like Christian Dvorak as well. Another forward that they have. Obviously they're struggling for offense. You don't really want to trade a younger forward, but they need somebody who can kind of bring back some value to maybe shake things up. Maybe they could swap for another young forward who might be able to produce a little bit more offense. I don't know what they do, but either way, Chayka needs to shake things up, and it is widely expected that he will do so in some capacity or another. But bringing in guys like Hall and Kessel have not worked out, and they desperately need to find some goal scoring somewhere, and they might have to move a top young asset to make it happen. Now, one of the big questions in this Sportsnet article as well centers around the Calgary Flames and the potential trade of young star forward Johnny Gaudreau. Johnny Gaudreau is not super young anymore. He's been around the NHL for some time, but he's still not really, past his prime either. But the Calgary Flames have been a team for the past couple of years that have been terribly inconsistent. Of course, we saw last year they had a tremendous regular season and then flamed out quickly in the playoffs. This year, they were taking a step back in regular season play. Many believe, though, that there's not a long leash left on this current group of core players before something is done if they don't take some steps forward and get some more success. So, obviously, when you look at their core, you're looking at guys like Gaudreau, Monahan, you got Matthew Tkachuk as well. Perhaps young goaltender David Rittich is on that list as well. Back end, you got like a captain like Mark Giordano, who's still playing pretty well given his age and everything. So, who goes? If they were to make a move, Johnny Gaudreau, to me, does make a lot of sense. For example, I see Matthew Tkachuk as being the new leader of this team, the future captain once Giordano is ready to move on or to relinquish to a younger player on the team like Tkachuk. I think he's likely the next captain of the team. Sean Monahan's a big, strong center iceman. He's harder to replace than a guy like Gaudreau. I know Johnny Gaudreau has had some tremendously, gifted offensive seasons, but if they need to shake things up, he would also generate a lot of value. And there's been a lot of talk about this really over the past year or two, off and on. It kind of comes and goes depending on how the Flames are doing. I would personally think heading into the trade deadline, my thought process was that Flames management, we're going to give this group one more kick at the can to get in the playoffs and see how things go. So maybe the outcome of this decision, whether or not they do make a big splash in the trade market, would be determined if hockey can come back. Can they get into the playoffs? Will the Flames be part of whatever Stanley Cup playoff format the NHL puts forward? And what kind of noise can they make? What kind of damage can they do? If they don't do well at all, then that might be enough for them to see that, it is time to make a change. And almost like I said, a guy like Gaudreau could bring back multiple pieces to help even things out with that team and really give them some future assets to build upon with their other core guys remaining in the mix. They're going to need some probably some different blue liners as well. They have some unrestricted free agents on the blue line, some question marks there too. So it's hard to say. I don't think it's a given that Gaudreau gets traded, but I do think it's a possibility, if it's not now, that in the next year or so, once this Flames team has had, another solid run, another kick at the can here, that if they don't get more success and get, at least a round or two of playoff victory, that we're going to see some kind of a significant move And to me, like I said, it makes the most sense for him to be the centerpiece going. Now, if you look at teams of where he could go, obviously some teams that are currently going through rebuilding would have a lot of cap space because he's not signed for too long a term. He's going to need another contract within the next couple of years. A team like New Jersey obviously would be very close to home for him. That might work. New Jersey is obviously going to be going through a rebuild. They got some great young forwards like Jack Hughes, Nico Hischier to build around. So obviously he'd fit in well, likely with those guys. Could be a little bit more of a leader. You get a team like the Columbus Blue Jackets, who we talked about yesterday, who could show interest in Taylor Hall. But if Gaudreau was available, maybe they would go that route as well. The only concern with Columbus, I think he'd be a good fit there and be the kind of player they need to obviously boost their offense. But obviously that's going to have to come in the form of a trade, and I'm just not sure what the Jackets would be able to give to the Flames to make everything work. They do have some good blue liners in Columbus. They have some interesting goaltenders as well. Maybe they can put a package together to entice the Flames. I'm not sure, but for me, I think Columbus could more likely address some of their needs through free agency. But a team like them, for example, kind of fits the description of a team I'd expect to be in the mix for Gaudreau, because if you look at all the other teams that are already up close to the cap, they're just not going to have the room without making a major splash themselves, which you never know. Maybe we could see that as well. Maybe Gaudreau goes out for another player of similar contract value and we see, a semi-big blockbuster trade. It's a possibility, but when the time comes for the Flames, if they do not get that other success, I do suspect Gaudreau would be their prime trade suspect. And I would think it could happen as early as this summer, depending on if hockey returns and if they can get this team one more kick at the can before that offseason kicks in. If the season ends up being canceled, I can see them maybe holding off a little bit longer before they make such a drastic move. Now, lastly here, I want to touch on the San Jose Sharks. Now, of course, with everything going on with the NHL and the season being on pause, the lost revenues, a lot of talk about there maybe being compliance buyouts offered to some of these cash-strapped NHL teams. They're going to be tight up against the cap and likely could buy out some players to make things a little bit more flexible for them. And if they go down that road, like we've seen in the past with other work stoppages, the San Jose Sharks starting goaltender Martin Jones would be a prime candidate for a buyout. He's been terribly inconsistent for the last 2 or 3 years, and certainly that's a contract I'm sure Doug Wilson and San Jose would like to move on from if they were given such an easy out. Now, clearly trading Jones is not easy because he hasn't played well and comes with a big ticket, so not easy to do. Not impossible, but certainly not easy either. But if they were given an easy way out, like a compliance buyout, I could see them maybe going down that road to look for another starting goaltender. Given the other players they have under contract, the big-time dollars attached, and their ages, I don't see Doug Wilson trying to go through a full rebuild here. I see them trying to do a little bit more like a reset. If you saw a few years back when they missed the playoffs, they came back stronger the next year, made it all the way to the finals. They just did a few minor changes, shook things up a little bit, and I can see them going with a similar approach this time. And a starting goaltender who can hold down the fort and give them a chance to win on a nightly basis would go a long way to making that team much more competitive. Obviously, if they were able to move on from Jones, Aaron Dell's also a free agent right now, pending on a UFA. So they could have a whole different tandem next time around when the next season gets underway. Obviously, some key players on the goaltending UFA market for the offseason, including Jacob Markstrom, Robin Lehner, and Braden Holtby. And there's going to be a few others as well. Obviously, any of those guys would likely come in and do a better job than they've received from Jones, although they might find it difficult to get the payday they're looking for, given the current situation of the economics in the league and the salary cap likely remaining flat as a best-case scenario. So it is possible those guys could not, it is possible some of those players could end up staying with their existing clubs, but I think for any of those existing teams to retain those goalies, they're going to end up having to shed other salary, just like San Jose would, to make an acquisition for one of them either. For Robin Lehner to stay in Vegas, or already paying Fleury a big chunk of money, they'd have to go that route. I don't see that happening. That Fleury would be the more obvious player to move on, and I don't see that happening right now in Vegas. You've got Braden Holtby in Washington, where they got Samsonov ready to take over. They'd have to lose another player for him to sign a short-term contract. I don't see that happening either, but I guess you never know, depending on how cheap he's willing to sign to remain with them for another year. And then you get Jacob Markstrom in Vancouver, likely looking for a 5 or 6 year deal, $6 million or so to get that contract completed. And Vancouver might have to shed some salary as well. Maybe they could finally move on from Louis Eriksson if their buyout situation, like I proposed for the Sharks, does come to be. That would be a great opportunity for Vancouver to move on from the final little bit of the contract left for struggling forward Louis Eriksson, and maybe that could free up the necessary money for them to keep Markstrom. But either way, it's quite likely that at least a few of these goalies move on to new destinations next year, and there'll be a prime opportunity for San Jose to move on from Jones, get themselves a new goaltender in there who can give them a chance to win, probably bring back guys like Thornton and Marleau if they're willing to re-sign. They still have their big-time ticket players like Logan Couture, Erik Karlsson, Brent Burns, Timo Meier, and they can continue to build around that with some cheaper pieces to fill out the roster and see if they can reset and come back stronger than ever next year. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments and we'll continue the conversation. Now, if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications. And thanks again to all of our channel membership holders. I certainly appreciate all your support. It goes a long way in helping out the channel. Thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you